In the name of God, I, Tasio, and my beloved wife Isblanda, considering our sins and fearful of the rage of the eternal judgment, in order to deserve the pardon of Christ's court, and for the soul of my family, and the sons and daughters that God has given me, we will make a concession and donation to the monastery that was founded in honor of God and San Pedro, of all our property and the long list of our riches herewith attached, and leave them to my son Ildesinto, who will be a Droy abbot of San Pedro's monastery. This order of payment and donation was signed and corroborated on the 2nd day of Calends of December, in the year 4, during the reign of King Radulfo. San Pere de Rodes lies at the end of the Pyrenees mountain range, at the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. The monastery's first historical mentioning dates back to 878. A lack of historical documentation has left San Pere de Rodes surrounded by countless legends. The oldest says that during the time of Pope Bonifacio IV, the head and an arm of St. Peter the Apostle were moved from Rome in order to prevent them from being desecrated by the Persians and Chaldeans, and were hidden where the monastery stands today. San Pere's most important monument is its church, which is surrounded by a chain of towers and mountains that defended it from the looting typical of the times. It consists of 3 naves, a transept, and 3 apses of parabolic lines. A vault covers the whole church. There is a barrel vault over the main nave, and the main arches extend over a series of superimposed columns. When we talk about the Western monastic world, we generally refer to the rule of Saint Benedict, which was a fountain of inspiration to countless other orders. Saint Benedict of Nursia drafted the rules during the first half of the 6th century. This digest of practical suggestions for living in a spiritual community made the growth of San Pere de Rodes, the first Christian spiritual frontier on the peninsula, possible. Extending the rule of ora et labora to all aspects of life, the monks, with the support of the nobles, expanded their domain to the property and farms captured during the Muslim expulsion, and at the same time developed their great intellectual capacity, becoming authors of countless manuscripts that have lasted until the present. It didn't matter what the conditions of work were. There were no obstacles when it came time to defending their faith. The nobleman Tasio and his son Ildesinto, the monastery's first abbot from 926 to 945, made San Pere de Rodes a grand and prestigious monastery. Their famous Jubilee celebrations, which lasted 8 days, attracted thousands of pilgrims from faraway lands, allowing for important cultural exchanges, as well as the strengthening of the Christian faith.
Dear Abbot Arnulf, I am sending our messenger to communicate the urgent need, according to Rome's orders, to illustrate all buildings with scenes from the sacred books, because of the many Christians who are not able to read the sacred scriptures. There is no place in a monastery that would not welcome an artist's engraving and chiseling, because this work has the same function as language. May God bless Santa Maria de Ripoll, Father Abbot Ildecindo, San Pere de Rodes.
Santa Maria de Ripoll was founded by Count Gilfredo the Hairy between 1879 and 1880. But it was the abbots Arnulf and Oliva who gave impetus to the monastery. The portal, a piece of work from the 12th century, joins passages from the Old Testament and the elderly of the Apocalypse with images of the Savior. It also exalts the figures of the Counts Ramon Berenguer III and IV, known for conquering Muslim territory. At the time, Ripoll was both the cradle and peak of artistic and cultural development. At the end of the 10th century, a school of miniaturists formed at the monastery with artists of various nationalities who figured out how to fuse the three artistic styles of the time: Byzantine, Arabic, and Mozarabic. Having been plundered and burnt in 1835, monastical life at the monastery disappeared. 50 years later, in 1886, the architect Elias Rogent began restoring the monastery and finished the project in 1893. Inside lay the remains of the counts of the houses of Barcelona and Cerdeña Urgell, Gilfredo the Hairy, and the Counts Berenguer III and IV. Despite the restorations, the monastery has kept much of the richness from its time of splendor, another test of man's fight to preserve his faith. Christianity's three pilgrimage routes have always been those that lead to Rome, Jerusalem, and Santiago de Compostela. Pilgrimages reached their peak during the 9th century, and it was a path the Benedictine order used to penetrate the Iberian Peninsula. In Spain, the pilgrimage routes coincide with ancient Roman highways. During their walk to Finisterre, the end of the world, the devoted found shelter throughout the long Christian route. With Balaguer's call to the reconquest, land that was once property of the Arabs was distributed amongst the Christian conquerors and the abbeys. Churches and castles were built in the isolated, enclosed, and hard-to-reach valleys of the Pyrenees, and the western border of Catalonia was protected and fortified in order to prevent further Muslim invasions. Artisans, skilled workmen, and masons who followed the Italian Lombardian style left their influence on the edges of the valleys as well as within. The architecture flourished to such a degree that even today, 7 churches still conserve their aesthetic beauty and medieval origin.
Esas iglesias románicas son auténticos microcosmos.
These Romanesque churches are authentic microcosms in which architecture, sculpture, and the paintings are integrated to respond, reflect, and give testimony to this religiousness. The capitals and the paintings from the areas of both the Pyrenees and Castile are magnificent examples today of the way medieval man thought in the Romanesque period. He was a little threatened and worried about the presence of a judging God, a God who would reward or punish according to one's behavior in this world.
The paintings that originally extended through the naves, columns, and altars often remained hidden by paintings and tapestries from later centuries. Christ Pantocrator, saints, apostles, fantastic animals, demons, and minstrels, combined with profane and religious scenes, make the paintings at Boï exceptional. The main function of painting and sculpture at this time was not to decorate, but rather to send out a strong religious message, and therefore bring the celestial world to the faithful. Through the architectural lines, scarce lighting, and paintings, the artists created an ambiance in the temple that transported you to another dimension that came from submitting to the fear of losing eternal life. The figures, which were originally polychromatic, are carved in poplar wood and represent Christ, Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, the Virgin Mary, John the Evangelist, and the two thieves, Demas and Justus. The bells of the Valley of Boï's churches represent the hundreds of believers and called them to fast, pray, or die. Their chimes were different for each occasion. The fire chime, the communion chime, a chime for death, baptism, loss, celebration, and the weather. An endless variety of sounds that united the inhabitants under the same Christian faith.
Mr. Suero Quiñones, as true gentlemen and brothers in arms, we both know that you have laid down a challenge on the passage over the Órbigo Bridge, part of the pilgrimage route to Santiago, and those who go looking for holy forgiveness must fight for your enjoyment. In the name of God, we offer you eternal forgiveness in exchange for breaking all your swords. If this is not the case, we will take up your challenge, and like the gentlemen we are, we will finish the day at the tavern.
Like San Pere de Rodes, the Abbey of Poblet is also shrouded in dark legends. The monastery's founding was made possible thanks to a land donation from Ramon Berenguer IV, Count of Barcelona, to the Cistercian monks of the Fontfroid Abbey. A group of 12 monks, with their abbot, Gerardo, at the head, crossed the Pyrenees after the Muslims were expelled in 1151. They established themselves in an area that would soon become a very important abbey, and from that point on, prayer, study, and work went on without a break. The Cistercian monks at Poblet followed the rule of Saint Benedict: obedience, harmony, and conversio morum, which refer to the communal life in which the congregation isolates themselves in poverty and silence. This devotion and way of life are based on three important points: vocation, love of God, and chastity.
Para ser monje lo que se necesita es tener vocación.
You need to have a vocation to be a monk, and to have a vocation means that you are drawn in a special way to this type of Christian life, which you feel, after a trial period, well situated and well adapted to this life. Therefore, to have a vocation means to be in love with Jesus Christ, doesn't it? All men are flesh, and we monks are of flesh and bones too. And of course, to live a monastic life does not mean that chastity has already been resolved. You have to fight, you have to struggle, and you have to reconcile yourself to the choice that you have made. I wouldn't give this up for anything.
In the main room, important issues dealing with organization and government were brought up. Regarding this, Saint Benedict said, "The abbot will call together the whole community and make the issue at hand known, and after hearing all the brothers' advice, he will weigh what has been said and do what he thinks is suitable." Putting up with the harsh winter under those conditions was yet another test of their faith. The heating room allowed the monks to stay warm throughout the austere 13th century building. The room was often used for cutting the monks' hair as well. It still has the mystic and communitarian spirit that united the monks around the fire. It's impossible to speak in detail about the construction and history of Poblet's main church because of its incredible artistic richness. However, we can say that it is constructed in the shape of the Latin cross and is set up as if for a ritual, with the apse facing east. 3 naves are integrated within the church. Their dimensions are 85 meters long by 21 wide, and in the main nave, 28 meters high. The surprising alabaster altarpiece was carved by the artist Damian Forment between 1527 and 1529, during the time of the Emperor Carlos V. The tomb of Martin the Humane, erected together with that of Saint Benedict, is a showcase of the most known artists and artisans of the time, like Federico Mares in this example. The altarpiece of Santa Maria, as well as other corners of saints' veneration, join the magic and miracle of man with the Christian faith. Traces of its magnificent colors are still visible, making it easy for us to imagine the amazing sight the people must have enjoyed back then. Where the church's nave and transept cross, 2 arches support the tombs of the King and Queen of Aragon, Don Jaime I the Conqueror, and Don Alfonso II the Chaste. Don Juan I also rests here, as well as his 2 wives and the remains of Juan II and Doña Juana Enriquez, Fernando I's parents. Gothic sculpture emanates a halo of life. Different from Romanesque sculpture, it doesn't depend on the architectural space in which it stands. It is independent of it. Therefore, the attitudes and gestures are more natural and realistic, thereby becoming more human. They draw us into their human aesthetic and have a much more emotional rather than rational feeling. In the folds of cloth, we can see that the molding and composition remain free and are inspired by the natural world. Hence, the figures transmit feelings of sweetness, beauty, and a desire to live. Poblet, declared by UNESCO a World Heritage Site, is one of the wonders of the world. A guardian of faith, culture, art, and history.
Let it be understood, Your Majesty. Every 28th day of December, the day the Knights Templar were slaughtered, a man on a white horse will ride through Miravet, its vineyards and waters, and will call out to his deceased brothers to go conquer the tomb of Christ in the Holy Land. To die for a cause is to die without guilt.
In the 12th century, the inhabitants of Miravet, just like those in the riverside towns of the Ebro, were not Arabs or Berbers as many people thought. In reality, they were the descendants of the Iberians. Iberian means of the people who inhabit the Iber, which means the large river, the Ebro River in this case.
As with all fortresses, the strategic importance of Miravet lies in its total control of the area. Controlling the mouth of the Ebro guaranteed their safety. Abrupt and impregnable geography let the Templars have maximum power.
The Knights Templar appeared in the Christian world at the beginning of the 12th century, after the First Crusade. and they came thanks to Saint Bernard. Saint Bernard at that time was the center of Christianity. As the chosen one, he appointed and dismissed popes. He was also the abbot of the Cistercians, and therefore the Cistercian order, like the Knights Templar, arrived in the Kingdom of Aragon and in Catalonia thanks to Saint Bernard.
The Muslim girls washed laundry in the river, which was an ideal moment for conversation. The main jobs of the people were weaving ropes for difficult navigation and tubes for drying fruit, and making clay objects in the ancient Muslim tradition, which has lasted until the present, and which now constitutes one of Miravet's important industries. In the main square, groups of Moors and Jews came together to debate and to buy and sell their goods. The village's busy life stopped when the holy soldiers passed through to show respect and admiration for the defenders of the faith.
Their main symbol is the white cape, the Cape of Purity. This was a serious matter. This was a privilege granted to the Knights Templar and no one else. And curiously also to the Cistercian monks, who wore a white cape with a piece of black cloth over it, which shows both sides of the coin. The flag of the Knights Templar was black and white, the famous balsa in the Catalan language, the balsan in French. It was their standard, while their cape was white. There were also Templars who wore black capes. They were Sergeants Templar. They too were monks, and they had the same obligations and the same prerogatives as the knights who wore the white cape.
And there was always the river, the path to the interior, the very life of the Templars. People arrived at the greatest center of military and spiritual control in the entire peninsula by boats carried only by the Ebro's current. The fortress's rocks were all carved, with black and red lines in the mortar that described celestial and earthly order. Capers adorned the old walls, which were bombarded 1,000 times, and not always correctly reconstructed. The refectory, where the Templars decided the future of the Crown of Aragon, is a masterpiece of the mid-12th century, a perfect example of the transition from the Romanesque to the Gothic style. With almost flat windows, it's an authentic architectural feat. The chapel, one piece built over an enormous crypt, has a beautiful triumphal arch and a large rose window, a symbol of the ecclesiastical category of the owner of the castle. Strangely, it does not face the exterior, but instead towards the interior of the nave. Its purpose, without overlooking its spirituality, was to serve as a platform from where 4 archers could shoot their arrows. The Templars never left Miravet. The most famous monk knights of the time are still buried in the castle's enormous cemetery. Legend has it that their ghosts still wander, demanding their true place in history.
And here we can see a silver apple encrusted with jewels that the kings bore in medieval artistic representations. Here, the master sends the apple to the king of Catalonia and Aragon as a symbol of his earthly powers. Whoever possessed this apple had power over earthly affairs.
My dear Abbot Jenner, having granted the patronage to resume the works of the monastery, allow me to send you my godson, Felipe, who has much restraint and a deep desire to turn his life over to God, so that you can admit him as one monk more into the Santos Creus monastery. May God bless you, Pedro el Grande.
Construction began on the Santos Creus monastery in 1174. Legend has it that many nights the shepherds saw lights appear on different parts of the mountain. The next day, they marked the spots where the lights had appeared with wooden crosses. After a time, there were so many that the place was named the Field of the Sacred Crosses. The magnificent capitals stand out and are a fundamental aid for understanding the scriptures. The main cloister follows the architectural ideas of the 14th century and has no connection to the simple austerity of the primitive cloister. The Cistercian principles are those of simplicity, austerity, and poverty. A deep devotion to the Virgin Mary is also typical, and their churches are often linked to her. It's impossible to imagine communal life without any rules to regulate its stability. Saint Benedict, a native of Nursia, drafted rules that his disciples adopted and have sometimes modified. These constitute the beginning of the Western monastical world. According to Saint Benedict, a monk should obey the abbot, pray, work, and study the divine readings in depth. Prayer that followed work, and work that followed prayer. To stroll through Santos Creus's interior gardens is to relive times of intense spiritual life and permanent closeness to God. crops formed part of the monastery's sustenance. Self-reliance complied with one of St. Benedict's rules. Monks must not leave the monastery so that they may avoid earthly temptations. As the years passed, however, this idea became more flexible. The community gathered in the church 8 times a day to praise the Creator and join in prayer. The 7 daily prayers are Lauds, 1st, 3rd, 6th, 9th, evening, and complete. St. Benedict refers to the nightly prayer as follows. In the winter, they will get up at the 8th hour of the night, or 8 hours after the sun has set, so that they have rested a bit more than half the night and get up rested. After the evening prayers, those brothers who need to will study the Psalter and the readings. In the summer, after celebrating the fasts, there will be a short break so the brothers can do their natural duties. Then Lauds will immediately follow, which should be celebrated at the first rays of dawn. In chapter 22, St. Benedict orders the following. They will all sleep in the same place, but if there are too many, they will sleep by 10s or 20s, with the elders watching over them. Each one will sleep in his own bed and will receive bedding provided by the abbot. A lamp or candles, made by the monks themselves, will burn continuously until dawn. They will sleep clothed and girdled with cinctures and cords, so that they are always ready for their duty, and when given the signal, will get up without tardiness for God's work, in all seriousness and modesty. The youngest brothers will not have adjoining beds, but rather be separated by the elders' beds. Rest will be in communion with God. Mont Blanc was founded at the intersection of various roads. It functioned as a vital center of commerce from the 8th to the 15th centuries. Mont Blanc was the nexus of all the area's populations, but most strongly symbolized the meeting point between the community and the monasteries of Poblet and Santes Creus. It was a place where the monks could sell the products from their farms, and at the same time, it provided them with the goods they needed for their own consumption. But more than anything, perhaps, Mont Blanc denoted the only meeting point between the common man on the street and God's earthly intermediaries. It wasn't odd to find monks in the typical medieval markets. It was a different way for them to get close to a world almost closed off to the order of St. Benedict. the solitude of La Cartuja de Montalegre, an order created by Bruno of Cologne in 1084, we check on the life of the Carthusian monks and their life of submission to God. The sequestered life of the Carthusian monks, who believe that internal solitude is necessary in order to reach eternal life, runs its course in uniformly sized cells, with a little room where they pray and meditate, a table, a small individual library, a bed with a light mattress, and a desk. From the 11th century to today, as the images show, the whole community has searched for spiritual contact with God through self-denial and prayer.
There is a strong political influence, since political organizations were not conceived as separate from religious ideas, religious fundamentals, or religious justifications. In this way, the kings, or the counts in Catalonia, always acted with the advice and collaboration of the high ecclesiastic authorities, especially the bishops and the abbots of the main monasteries.
My dear brother, as I understand it, you have a minstrel that plays the lute and the small organ, and since we wish to have him at our service, we ask that with this letter he be sent to our court for honorable celebrations. We will provide him with the benefits we lavish on all musicians. Zaragoza, sealed in secret, September the 13th, 1388. Your King, Johannes.
siglo XIV supone un momento de estancamiento de esas
The
formas.
14th century highlighted these forms, but surprisingly, in Spain, came to signify the creation of the great Catalan cathedrals, like the churches of Barcelona, Manresa, Tarragona, and Girona. And, on the other hand, we find that it is a time of deep social change, in large measure caused by the appearance of the plague. The plague became one of the 4 apocalyptic riders that provoked a great demographic decrease, great social commotion, and an economic crisis.
Santa Pau is a picturesque village in the Garrocha area, among the foothills of the Pyrenees, in the middle of a volcanic area. But in the 14th century, this beautiful village became a victim of the plague. They were perhaps the most heavily affected population in the whole region. The plague invaded Europe. It spread quickly through an entire population already weakened by hunger, drought, and war. For many years, a white rag hung on the outside of a house was synonymous with death. The plague, a relentless calamity, symbolized the end of an era, a dark era during which man confronted his most painful affliction under the protection of his religious beliefs. Afterwards, there was hope, a hope that had a name: the Renaissance.